Hello everyone, this is Jen and I make useful English lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary devices and more to help you get top grades in the subject. In today's video, we are analysing Nick Carraway, who is the narrator in The Great Gatsby. Nick is the sardonic, witty first-person narrator who guides us through his observations of Jay Gatsby, the Buchanans, and the series of incidents and network of relationships surrounding these characters. He is Daisy Buchanan's second cousin, Tom Buchanan's ex-classmate at Yale, Jay Gatsby's neighbour in West Egg, and Daisy's friend Jordan Baker's one-time love interest. Now, because Nick is connected to everyone and everything in the novel, we can consider him the nexus, i.e. the central point that unites all the characters and events which propels the narrative. Some readers think that Nick is actually the alter ego for F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author, whose cynicism about the superficial excesses and hedonistic decadence of 1920s America is somewhat mirrored in Nick's voice. And indeed, from the very start, the narrator makes it clear that he holds much of the people and culture around him in contempt, except for one character, Jay Gatsby. Nick's attitude towards Gatsby is complex and conflicted, at times disdainful and incredulous, but towards the end, wistful and sympathetic. So the standard interpretation of Nick Carraway is that he's the only sober, clear-eyed character in the novel, because unlike the others, he is more moral and honest, with a vantage point perched above the morass of shallow minds, dirty money, and cheating husbands. The implication then is that Nick is a reliable narrator whom we can trust, largely. But in the rest of this video, I'm going to argue against this view. Rather than being a morally upright and somewhat reliable narrator, Nick shows us that he is in fact just like the rest of the characters, as one who is possessed of the same human flaws and dark desires we see in Tom, Daisy, Jordan, Gatsby, etc. Nick may be moral and honest in nature, but there are moments when he lapses in the face of outward temptation and inner prejudices, which necessarily compromises reliability. So Nick isn't a reliable narrator in any objective sense, but because he is acutely aware of his humanity and never takes himself too seriously, he comes across effective and likeable as a narrator. So if you don't want to miss out on any of my top grade analysis about this very important character in The Great Gatsby, then make sure that you sit tight and watch till the very end of this video. Let's go! At the start of chapter 1, Nick gives his readers a caveat about the limits of his empathy. Despite advice and awareness to the contrary, Nick just cannot help but be judgmental towards some people, especially when, quote, as my father snobbishly suggested and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So he's saying we just have to accept that there are such people who unfortunately suffer grave flaws in character. And we're going to judge, take it or leave it. So this prepares us for a series of critical evaluations of some of the less than decent characters. But hey, that's what comes with blunt honesty. And Nick tells us later that I am one of the few honest people I have ever known. However, Nick never really comes across as moralistic or self-righteous because he fully accepts that he or his judgment isn't perfect, as I'll go on to illustrate with other moments in the video. In fact, Nick does this already in chapter 1, when he suggests that his subjectivity isn't only revealed in his clear dislike for some of the characters, like the Buchanans, but also in his inexplicable affection for people like Gatsby. So there's a sense that Nick, too, is to an extent enchanted by Gatsby's romantic readiness and larger-than-life charisma, despite the man representing everything for which Nick has an unaffected scorn. It's worth considering if Gatsby in reality would seem so alluring a character had it not been for the somewhat rose-tinted filtering of Nick's narration. Is Gatsby really such a class apart from the rotten crowd? Or does Nick only think so because he actually likes Gatsby? After all, in some ways, Gatsby's just as materialistic, shallow, and morally compromised. He likes Daisy because of her wealth and background. He hosts these extravagant parties in the belief that this will buy him respect, which is of course delusional, and he deals in shady businesses like stolen bonds. So what's interesting is that Nick acknowledges, in fact alerts us, to the fact that he himself has fallen to the charm of this man, So the implication is that his portrayal of Gatsby will be romanticized, maybe even a bit heroized, and as such, unreliable. So one example that reflects Nick's impulse to paint Gatsby favorably comes in chapter 6, when he disrupts the narrative's chronological sequence by bringing forward the Dan Cody backstory about how Gatsby got his first big break. Gatsby told me all this very much later, but I've put it down here with the idea of exploding those first wild rumors about his antecedents, which weren't even faintly true. So we later find out in chapter 8 that Gatsby doesn't come clean about his humble origins and Dan Cody's patronage until after Tom exposes his shady business dealings in their hostile exchange about Daisy's allegiance at the Plaza Hotel. Had Nick told us at this point when Gatsby had shared this backstory instead of keeping it vague with very much later, our impression of Gatsby as a dishonest, cagey character would have crystallized at this point in the narrative, thus making it harder for us to stand behind the man as we go on to read the novel. The fact that Nick is so eager to explode the rumors about Gatsby, though, shows his protectiveness towards the man, which is likewise reflected in Nick's quick rebuttal to Tom about Gatsby not being a bootlegger. So from a narratorial standpoint, by clarifying the truth about Gatsby's background, but also withholding unflattering information which would have presented Gatsby negatively, Nick removes the mystique surrounding Gatsby and humanizes him as someone whose financial ambitions stem from deep insecurities, rather than having us focus on Gatsby's manipulative dishonesty. This draws us closer to the protagonist as someone who's not so different from us, which makes us pity him all the more as the narrative moves towards the tragic climax of Gatsby's death. By the way, guys, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below, subscribe to my channel, and switch on that bell notification if you find this video helpful so far. This would really help me carry on making these useful English Lit study videos so that you can get top grades in the subject and we can inspire more people to enjoy the study of literature. Now, for most of the novel, Nick makes his scorn for most of the people and events around him quite clear. Often his tone is sardonic and cynical, and in less judgmental moments, he is witty and incredulous. In any case, the general picture that we get is that unlike the others who are either confused or deluded, Nick has a much better sense and sensibility about what's going on. He teases Daisy, rebuffs Tom, highlights the hypocrisy of characters like Myrtle Wilson and Jordan Baker, and when he's at Gatsby's parties, Nick observes with dripping sarcasm the follies of the other attendees. But despite his open contempt for most things and people, Nick is likeable because he makes fun of his own follies and flaws as well. While he sees that people show up to Gatsby's parties for nothing more than the opulent splendor and the money-grabbing opportunities and their own fickle enjoyment, Nick confesses that he also enjoys these parties. Especially after having taken 2 finger bottles of champagne, the scene had changed before my eyes into something significant, elemental, and profound. So he may find superficiality distasteful, but he himself is not above desiring those creature comforts that come with wealthy associations. Nick is also aware of his occasional gauchiness, which is amplified at moments to humorous effect. For instance, after he sets Gatsby and Daisy up to meet at his flat, he realizes that he's an awkward third wheel, and that he feels a bit odd amidst the heightened emotions between these 2 long-lost lovers. As Nick makes himself scarce by leaving the house, he knows that there's actually not much he can do except to stand outside on his lawn and under the pouring rain. But what's supposed to be a rather awkward vignette, Fitzgerald turns into a funny, but also somewhat pensive moment. I walked out the back way, just as Gatsby had when he had made his nervous circuit of the house half an hour before, and ran for a huge black knotted tree, whose massed leaves made of fabric against the rain. Once more was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaved by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes. There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house, so I stared at it, like Kant at his church steeple, for half an hour. So Nick's exaggerated running towards the huge black knotted tree with massed leaves is the stuff of caricature, and the fact that he makes my irregular lawn and its small muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes the centre of his attention here suggests how ludicrous he feels about the mismatch between the emotional gravitas of Gatsby and Daisy's meeting and the unsophisticated decor of the setting in which this affair is taking place. Now, this sense of an odd, comical disproportionality is also borne out by the simile of Nick staring at Gatsby's enormous house like Kant at his church steeple for half an hour. The allusion here is to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who thought that looking at steeples for long periods of time helped clarify his thoughts. But given that there's nothing too philosophical or lofty about this moment, the comparison of Nick, who is this uneasy broker of broken human relations, with Kant, who is this father of transcendental idealism, seems like another wild mismatch. But the irony, of course, is that the one character whose thoughts really need some straightening out at this moment is Jay Gatsby, who is instead in the house with the very woman who is the source of all of his confusion and delusion. And Nick keeps it real until the end. For all his decency, integrity, and depth, he never once loses sight of the fact that he can be just as naive, provincial, quixotic, and easily seduced by worldly trappings as all those he holds in contempt or even pity, as he reflects in the final chapter. I am part of that Middle West, a little complacent from growing up in the Carraway house in a city where dwellings are still called through decades by a family's name. I see now that this has been a story of the West after all. Tom and Gatsby, Daisy and Jordan and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. While the instinct earlier may have been scornful solidarity between Gatsby and me against them all, Nick recognises that ultimately he too is subject to those same flaws he sees in everyone around him. The polysyndeton in Tom and Gatsby, Daisy and Jordan and I groups Nick with the rest as people who all possess some deficiency in common which made them subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. Like the rest of his Western ilk, Nick knows that no money in the world can rid them of that Midwestern stamp of birth, which makes them forever strangers in the glitz and glam of the East, with which Nick calls its quality of distortion. And indeed, perhaps a bit of this Eastern quality has also rubbed off on Nick's narrative lens, which is also, of course, characterized by the distortion of subjectivity. And that's it for this character analysis of Nick Carraway, everyone. I will make a separate video looking at Jordan Baker and the significance of Nick's relationship with her. So do check that out because it's an important subplot in the novel. So if you found this video useful for your studies, please do hit the like button below so that YouTube will share this with other passionate, top grade English lit learners like yourself all around the world. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already so you never miss out on my weekly lit study videos so that you can get top grades in the subject. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!